special welcome to our friends who traveled from Southern California and from across the country to take part in this conference. Thank you really to each of you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to express our gratitude to the conference co-sponsors, the College of Letters and Sciences Critical Issues in America series, which this year is focused on the topic Changing Faces of U.S. Citizenship. Thanks in particular to the series co-organizers, Professors Helen Morales of the Classics Department. I think that's Helen Lockin. How are you? There you are. Thank you. And also her co-organizer, Beth DePalma Digesser of the History Department. I don't think that he's later she'll be here. All right. Thanks as well to our other co-sponsor, the Walter H. Capps Center for the Study of Ethics, Religion, and Public Life, and to the Capps Center Director, Professor Kathleen Moore of the Religious Studies Department. I also finally want to acknowledge the IHC's Hester and Cedric Crowell Endowment, which is supporting this conference, which also is part of this year's IHC Public Events Series, Crossings and Boundaries. Now, last month, I attended a statewide training on higher education in prisons that was hosted by the Prison University Project. And as many of you know, the Prison University Project supports the college program at San Quentin State Prison, which is an associate's degree program that is one of the few on-site college programs in California. And for 3 days, the conference organizers brought their comprehensive experience and wisdom to bear on issues ranging from the institutional logistics of prison education, curriculum development, and course planning to understanding student needs, goals, and potentials, and many, many things in between. I just want to say that our conference today is both more focused and more exploratory. The question that will run throughout the day's discussions concerns the role that the humanities can and do play in the education of incarcerated individuals. The question itself, of course, gives rise to further questions concerning, for example, the institutional, pedagogical, social, and ethical frameworks within which, and the interpersonal dynamics through which, humanities prison education takes place. We are fortunate to have with us in the room now and throughout the day, both as presenters and as audience members, experienced teachers who have worked, and students who have worked in a range of humanities prison education programs. And I am certain that we will learn much about our multifaceted topic from today's contribution, or from their contributions today. And so we are eager to get going. And so without further delay, please allow me to introduce the Michael Douglas Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts, John Majewski, who will open our program. Thank you.
For being here this morning, and thank you for participating in the Humanities in Prison Conference. I'm very grateful for Susan and the IEC for organizing this conference and for all of the work that she has done in terms of bringing the humanities and bringing education and bringing UCSB into the lives of the incarcerated. So my background is that of a historian of 19th century United States, particularly slavery and the Civil War. And so as I think about issues of incarceration and education, in my mind it's almost irresistible for me to make comparisons with the 19th century and to make comparisons of education and the enslaved. And I don't want to mean to say that slavery in the 19th century is the same thing as incarceration in the 21st century. Obviously there are very important differences, but there are certain commonalities between 19th century slavery and 21st century incarceration, that both systems are systems of oppression that are designed to sap the autonomy of individuals, that put individuals who are incarcerated in a state of where they may face violence, or the risk of violence and that stress, and a constant sense of regimentation, where even the daily routines of your life are controlled by somebody else, are controlled by others. And I guess what 19th century slavery and 21st century incarceration have in common is a process of dehumanization, of making people easier to control by removing key elements of their humanity, of their economy, of their selves. This is where I think education, and particularly education in the humanities, comes in both the 19th century and the 21st century, in terms of fostering a sense of self, a sense of imagination of different possibilities, a sense of self-confidence, of mastering difficult questions and new bodies of knowledge. Education, particularly education with humanities focus, can reverse that process of dehumanization, leading to a sense of autonomy and ability to imagine a different future and imagine a different life. And as a 19th century historian, I'm especially aware of many examples of this from my own field. And the example that most comes to mind is that of Frederick Douglass. He was a enslaved person in Maryland. He was sold from a plantation in Maryland as a young boy into Baltimore. He was sold to a couple. The wife took upon herself to teach Frederick Douglass to read, which was actually against the law in most southern states to teach a slave to read, precisely because it could undermine the system. When the husband found out that the wife was teaching Frederick Douglass the way to read, he immediately put it into the lessons, because he understood that to provide that sense of autonomy, of accomplishment, to give Frederick Douglass the ability to imagine different futures and different possibilities, to give him hope for a new future, would undermine the system of slavery. And so those lessons were put to an end. But Frederick Douglass was so riven and so smitten by the idea of learning and reading and imagination that he ended up selling what little food he had to neighborhood boys who in return taught him to read. And then he used those skills of literacy eventually as an adult to be able to escape slavery, and then came to the North, where he became a well-known abolitionist orator and did much to end the system of slavery. And that example, Frederick Douglass, takes us in a somewhat different direction of not only does humanities education provide us a way of giving a sense of autonomy of what it means to be human for those who are incarcerated, but it also begins us down the road of thinking about the social justice system and the system of incarceration in new ways. It gives us the ability of thinking about real change. And I think one of the functions of the system of incarceration and dehumanization is that it makes us also uncomfortable with that system of incarceration that we want to instinctively avoid it. It becomes the other. It becomes somebody else's problem. It becomes a problem that we want to ignore, but yet we can't ignore. And by giving a sense of humanity to those who have been incarcerated, it helps us create an atmosphere of the possibility of real change. And in this regard, I'm reminded of the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, who as a young man became committed to ending slavery, and he did so by making sure that his voice was heard, and that slaves were presented not as objects, but as human beings. And the famous quote of William Lloyd Garrison is, "I am in earnest, I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." And I'm very proud of this conference, and very proud of the work Susan Derwin has done for providing us with the opportunity and the venue of having our voices heard. Because one of the things that William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and many others in the 19th century who worked so hard to end the oppression of slavery was that it wouldn't happen by itself. It would take hard work, it would take detailed planning, it would take the creation of institutions order for that to happen. And I'm very proud that UCSB has become part of that institutional framework for thinking about education in the prisons, for thinking about new ways of imagining our system of incarceration. So again, very grateful for Susan, very grateful for the IHC, and very grateful for all of you who will spend their day with us here at UC Santa Barbara. So enjoy the conference.
So now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our first panel, which will be moderated by Dorota. I want to say it right. Dutch. I want to say Deutsch, it's Dutch. Dutch. No, not whatever. Dutch. Yes. And I must also thank Dorota because really the germ of this conference came from her. I think it was last spring. You came to our offices and said you were interested in understanding why the classics are taught so frequently and how they're taught inside the prisons. Hence was born a conference that was built around this and became what we have today. So thank you, and start the show for us.
Thank you for making it happen. I'm delighted to introduce our first panelist, my departmental colleague, Emilio Capettini. Emilio received his PhD in classics from Princeton University. In 2016, he has a broad interest in ancient novel, Greek tragedy, Greek epic poetry. He's currently working on a book on the dynamics of selfhood in Capettini versus Ethiopia. And during his final year as a graduate student at Princeton, Emilio co-taught an introductory Latin course at a New Jersey youth correctional facility as part of the Princeton University's prison teaching initiative. So, Emilio.
I'll try to keep my remarks short so that we will have enough time for discussion at the end of all the panelists. So, in the late spring of 2015, my friend and then classmate, Jessica Wright, who is sitting over there, told me that the Latin language sequence that she had proposed as part of the college and prison program that was facilitated by NJSTAT, the New Jersey Scholarship and Transformative Education in Prison Consortium, had been accepted. I was very excited and immediately asked Jess whether I could be involved in the project. This was, of course, not the first class offered as part of the college and prison program. Classmates of mine had already taught English classes, whereas brother students and postdocs from STEM had offered math classes. But it was the first class focused entirely on the field of my graduate studies, namely classical languages, culture, and literature. As I started to think more carefully about the implications of teaching Latin in a prison context, however, my feelings became more mixed. On the one hand, the class we were about to teach seemed to provide the perfect opportunity to democratize classics. The study of Latin and Greek has often been used as a marker of elite status. That's definitely the case in this country, in Italy, my home country, in the UK. And as a tool to reinforce economic, racial, and cultural divides. What better way then to correct this troubling aspect of the tradition of classical studies than by bringing Latin to an environment where one would least expect to find it? On the other hand, however, it became clear to Jess, me, and the other two classicists who were part of the teaching team that precisely because we were bringing Latin into a prison, we were running the risk of perpetuating the troubled history of classics as an imperialist instrument, a superior field of knowledge whose primary function is to enlighten and to a certain extent civilize. We quickly realized that if we wanted to prevent our efforts from acquiring distressing colonial overtones, we needed, on a more general level, to be upfront with our students about the history of our discipline, and on a more practical level, to avoid making grammatical knowledge, which has often been used to exclude certain groups from approaching the classical world, to be all and then all of our class. As we designed the syllabus, we tried then to combine the focus on vocabulary and grammar, that is a necessary part of an introductory Latin course, but that can also be quite burdensome, with readings that would enable our students to get a more well-rounded understanding of ancient culture and literature, and with assignments that would encourage them from the early stages of the class to engage actively with the language they were learning. We asked them, for instance, to read an article on the relationship between classics and hip-hop, written by Dorota, who was here on Monday, and to compose short epigrams, to read analysis and interpretations of epic poetry by contemporary writers, and to prepare as they created responses short poems in English. Or again, to read some selections of Hellenistic philosophers and to discuss which concepts and images resonated with their own experiences. As is clear, we entered the class with a fairly precise idea of the direction in which we wanted to go. Yet we also involved the students as much as possible in the definition of the syllabus, always encouraging them during the semester to give us feedback and input as to what they found interesting or challenging. In short, we strove to create a classroom space in which the students would be not only challenged by the complexity of Latin grammar, something which they themselves asked us not to tone down, but in which they would also find ever new connections between the ancient world and their own lives. So this is all nice and good on paper, but what happened when we took our carefully prepared syllabus into the all-male youth correctional facility where we were supposed to teach our two-hour classes per week? Did the course turn out exactly as we had imagined? Of course not. One of the greatest challenges, and of course people who have taught in prison know this really well, one of the greatest challenges we faced was that the environment in which we were operating was extremely unpredictable. There was no way of knowing, for instance, whether our classes would be allowed to run for the full 2 hours. At times, the students were elected to the school area well after our start time. On other days, they were forced to return to their cells well before our allotted time had passed. Equally difficult to predict was the exact number of students we would have in class each time. It happened more than once that an officer did not let a student come to class, even though that student had been granted permission to attend. And in some cases, we as well, with instructors, were prevented from accessing the school area because our clothes did not conform to the guidelines we had to follow, or because our names had been omitted for obscure reasons from the list of visitors allowed to enter the facility. In one instance, an officer whom we had never seen before, or at least had never seen before, insisted that the badges that my co-teacher and I were wearing, which incidentally were the exact same badges we had been wearing for months, did not grant us permission to remain alone with the students, and that therefore our class needed to stop immediately. As you can imagine, it took a lot of pleading to persuade him to consult other colleagues, and then to let us continue our class. These unexpected setbacks were obviously frustrating for us, but they were only part of the difficulties faced by the students. Learning Latin, as I'm sure many in the room can attest, is definitely not an easy enterprise. Try to imagine how much harder it must be when you do not have access to quiet spaces in which to study and focus, or when you have not been able to sleep or shower because a storm caused a power outage and threw the entire facility into chaos. And by the way, this happened while we were teaching Latin 102. Yet, the performance of our students did not differ markedly from that of any other group of Latin learners. Some of them dropped after a few weeks. Others decided to stop after Latin 101. Others yet struggled with some grammatical concepts or with the memorization of forms, but pushed through both semesters, whereas a few sailed through the course with impressive ease. What was especially fascinating to see was how those who made it through both semesters welcomed the peculiar challenges posed by Latin, and whenever they faced difficulties, were able not only to address them, but also to reflect on them with a smile, turning them into material for their creative projects. Thus, for instance, one student decided to complete his final project, a translation of the section of Book 4 of Ovid's Metamorphoses that details Perseus' rescue of Andromeda. His reason for doing so was not only that he enjoyed epic poetry and was already familiar with the story, but also that he found Ovid, and here I'm quoting his language, effing extremely hard to read and translate. And for this reason, the perfect author to tackle in order to, and again I'm quoting him, go out with a bang. Another student, when asked to compose a short, epic-sounding poem, humorously compared mastering the intricacies of Latin grammar and syntax to the glorious feats performed by ancient heroes. I would like to quote part of his poem, which is titled My Quest for Ovid, because I think it neatly encapsulates the trajectory followed by the students in the class. So here are, I think, the first 3 stanzas. Finding Hades' entrance, or the subject of a sentence, is about knowing where to look, over by the babbling brook. Upon entering this maze, I got lost in a verbal haze. In order to finish my descension, I must figure out the declension. Don't know if the ending's right, but I'll put up a fight. Now that I'm here, Ovid better fear. Hide, cry, run away, hope I go astray. So the movement from loss and confusion to open confidence that we see in this line mirrors what happened in the classroom as students became not only more familiar with Latin, but also more willing both to ask for guidance and to assert their opinions. That during our meetings, they felt free to make mistakes, to voice their frustrations, and to express their views was, I think, one of the most important aspects of the course. And just as important was, I believe, the encouragement and support that we tried to provide. I realize that this last statement might sound as a cliché. Yet, what surprised me the most during the 2 semesters in which we visited that correctional facility was the fact that even some of the people who were supposed to help the inmates acquire the skills that would enable them to succeed once released did not truly believe in the importance of their role. One episode in particular comes to mind. Jess and I had just arrived at the prison when suddenly the entire facility was placed on lockdown. Unable to access the school area, we were escorted to an administrative office where we were asked to wait for the end of the lockdown. As we were sitting there, we were joined by an employee of the prison who had been teaching vocational courses for the inmates for over a decade. As we started talking, he not only expressed reservations as to the idea of teaching Latin in a correctional facility, which might be understandable, but also claimed that all education efforts in a prison context are pointless, since they do not result in a decrease in recidivism. Now, I'm not interested in litigating this final point. I will just say that the most recent data proves that what happens is precisely the opposite. The more education you provide to people who are incarcerated, the lower the degree of recidivism becomes. Yet, what I found astonishing was the fact that the very person who was supposed to provide the support necessary to fight recidivism had, for all intents and purposes, completely forsaken his role. If we attend then to the challenges that many incarcerated people face when dealing not only with guards and officers, but also with those figures who should be more sympathetic and supportive, I think that an important facet of teaching the humanities in prison comes to the fore, and this is something that Dean Machuski was alluding to. Granted, our disciplines, contrary to vocational programs, who are very important, do not promote an acquisition of practical skills that are immediately spendable at the moment of re-entry into society. Yet, precisely because they enable the inmates to give prominence to their experiences and to engage in conversations that cannot take place within the hierarchical structure that dominates and shapes the rest of their usual day, humanities courses have an important function to play within the prison. Even a discussion of somewhat arid grammatical concepts and constructions, such as the passive periphrastic of the adjective absolute can have the important effect of making an incarcerated person feel heard and respected for their unique perspective and intellectual achievement. So I do not want to give the impression, however, that in my experience, encouragement and support flow only in one direction, from us instructor to the students. And here I'm going to focus specifically on my personal experience. The 2 semesters in which I co-taught the class happened to be very intense for me. I was on the job market, and I was trying to finish my dissertation. In the 2nd semester, I was forced to skip 3 full weeks of classes just to focus entirely on my academic process. I will never forget, however, how warm and supportive the students were when I finally returned to the class, nor will I forget how genuinely thrilled they were for Jess and for me when they learned that our new academic positions would take us to California. The classroom worked for us as a space not only of shared intellectual inquiry, but also of mutual support, a space in which to have truly humane interactions. This shown was clearly, I think, by the words with which one student concluded the introduction to his final project. He says, "All in all, I had a great time learning Latin and will miss you guys. I'm going to try to finish Brand New Ancients, one of the books that we read together, maybe by the time Justin and Emilio get back." I don't know if you finished. Did we succeed then in making Latin accessible to our students and in encouraging them to put their own stamp on what they learned? The variety of their final projects or the final project that were undertaken by those students who completed both semesters seems to suggest that we did. One student, as I've already mentioned, translated Ovid because he wanted to be challenged by his style and vocabulary. Another decided to translate Greek eggs and ham into Latin to prove that Latin texts too can be lighthearted and fun. Yet another translated the beginning of a book we had focused on when examining Epic, and that was Kate Tempest's Brand New Ancients, because he had been impressed by it and knew that it would force him to use all the grammatical structures that he had learned throughout the year, even the more challenging ones. The students' self-evaluations also made clear that they viewed their encounter with Latin as an overall positive experience. As more than one remarked, having successfully completed 2 semesters of Latin, a language which, with its seemingly never-ending declensions and conjugation, had appeared at the beginning of the course almost unapproachable, gave them the confidence to tackle other subjects that they felt would be out of their intellectual reach. I have to admit that while I read these comments, I obviously felt proud for having been a part of their achievements, but also protested in my head that Latin is not just a gym, as it were, in which to test one's muscles before moving on to other, maybe more worthwhile endeavors. It is a beautiful language that deserves to be studied in its own right and that can unlock endless intellectual adventures. But then again, if there is one thing that my experience teaching Latin in a prison has made abundantly clear to me, is that as teacher, we can only hope to be able to convey to our students, whether in a prison or in a university, what makes what we study so fascinating for us. It will be up to them, however, to decide on their own terms which of the paths with which they have been confronted they want to follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emilio. Our next speaker is Michael Morgan. Michael is the studio professor of voice and speech in the Department of Theatre and Dance. He is also the head of the Theatre and Community emphasis. Michael is the creator of the Odyssey project, which has been ongoing since 2011. The Odyssey project brings together delinquent youth from the Los Prietos camp and UCSB undergraduates in one classroom. Under Michael's mentorship, the students engage in exercises in reading, writing, and acting, which in the end lead to a rewriting and an original performance of the Odyssey. The Odyssey project has received numerous awards, including Pearl Chase, Senate Grant, several grants from the Santa Barbara Foundation, and the National Endowment, and a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. I'll give you my hand.
I'm going to just basically do a slideshow on this, which, because of time, I think will be most efficient. So, we got this project throughout the course that I created called The People's Voice, because I'm a voice teacher. So, I was very interested in getting people's voices who are not usually in classrooms and in privileged settings, liberated and out in the world. So that's our logo. And this is a sort of overview of what the project is. It is a form of applied theater that engages participants, stakeholders, and audiences in artistic endeavors that grapple with the issues experienced by incarcerated teens. It doesn't necessarily solve those issues, but it brings those issues to a public forum where they can be discussed, and hopefully there will be people in the audience who could come up with some sort of strategy. The project is youth-centered. It leads from their constructs of identity and vision. It's very important that they are the leaders of this project, and I don't come in just as a director, but that there's a lot of equality attempted in this template. In the last 7 incarnations, I'm about to go to 8 this summer, and actually I have another one coming up sooner than that. It's been a collaboration between UCSB and Los Prios Boys Camp. That is their sign. The Boys Camp is a minimum security detention facility in Santa Ynez, which is about 20 minutes away, more or less. And it's run by the County Probation in Santa Barbara. One of the fundamental principles of this project is that diversity can actually amplify learning outcomes. So the idea is to bring privileged and non-privileged individuals together to create a rich synergy that spurs educational growth. And they discover sort of things about themselves, obviously very different, but also sometimes in common. Very often, as we know, you see, you also deal with drug addictions, which is one of the big things that many of these incarcerated teens are struggling with. The project uses personal mythology to deconstruct, occupy, and then reconstruct Homer's masterwork, the Odyssey. I call this a theater intervention. It aims to give central placement to marginalized voices. The cast actually rewrites the Odyssey using their own life stories and to validate, in a way to validate their lives and to bring their script to the level of canonical text. So basically they inhabit the same space with Homer. We loosely use the hero's journey, we of course diverge from it, and they also inform that. It's sort of like, okay, well, is that really my journey in some ways? But we do have a kind of reference to it. Using Homer's heroic template, each participant charts a course of empowerment for their lives. And everyone in this course becomes a hero or a heroine on their creative paths to their homes, to their victories. The cast looks at the themes and adventures of Odysseus and rewrite this epic through their own lenses. We do a lot of writing. And they also do a lot of drawing. The drawings they create become the mise en scène of the piece. It basically becomes the set. The process leads to a construction of a show that actually is theirs, not only in terms of their being present, but also the design of the show is theirs. In order to avoid the doom of Aristotle's tragic hero, each cast member draws a self-portrait highlighting a fatal flaw. And then, in order to avoid that fate, through dialogue, through story, they're able to purge those stories in the attempt of actually avoiding the doom that flaw often brings to Sophocles' heroes, for example, Euripides' heroes. But they look at how they can actually alter that. And the Los Prietos Boys cast actually created a video which looks at the inciting incident, which in Odysseus, of course, is the rape and pillage at Isthmos. And they look at how they can actually show that in their own lives as an offending moment, and then they retell it again in such a way where they're able to own it and then perhaps also to question it, to reflect on it. The cast is supported by a team of university and community mentors. One of them is Christina McCarthy, who supports them in mask making. They make the masks. She gives them a lot of stuff, materials, but they actually create this mask. And some of the masks are quite beautiful. This is a mask that one of our participants, you created. It was basically he wanted to talk to his Aztec roots. And the mask basically for us is the realm of the gods and the goddesses. So, and for many of the youth, it becomes ancestor spirits. They actually pull on the energy of their family, dead family, as support persons in their lives or spirits in their lives. Here are the masked actors in performance. Zachary Price provides an alternative to street fighting. We use Aikido, which is a form of discipline. So again, what we are hoping to create are alternative visions and modalities. In 2012, we used fans as the weapon of choice based on the backstory of the actor playing Odysseus. Through his writing and through his sort of exploration, he discovered that his ancestor spirit was an aunt. Her favorite color was yellow, and he wanted to include that in the fan as part of his protection as he returned home to Ithaca and had to deal with the suitors. Rick Castillo has been a dance choreographer, and we utilized contemporary dance forms, hip-hop, crump dancing, again, creating a youth culture in this production. We also created elder culture in this production. Art Cisneros is a Chumash elder. He's a firekeeper and storyteller, and he combines ritual with theater. So we take those rituals and we basically integrate them into piece. The participants engaged in this theatrical experiment, I consider artist activists. They're artists because they are creating art. Of course, they may not go into a profession as an artist, but they're willing to tell their stories, and through that, claim their personal power. And I see that as an act of activism. The focus is on the youth. If it resonates out, and I hope it does resonate out to society, that's great, but it's really about them claiming their power. And through that choice of speaking truth to power, we often use rap as one of our modalities, hip-hop and rap. This is a poster for one of our shows. This is an intensely collaborative program. As many as 12 artists and scholars will intersect with the youth. And the idea is to give them a very enriched experience so they, and I know this word is loaded, but so they feel entitled, so they feel like they have the same entitlement that a lot of other people go to college do. When they perform not only to the public, but to other residents who are incarcerated, who are let out of incarceration, to come to see this, as well as their families, as well as the mayor's been there, and other people in political positions who can make actually strategic differences in their lives. So looking forward, we hope to, of course, deepen the project. We would like to increase production values so that we can bring in more mentors. And this is a very porous project. I like the idea of lots of modalities, other writers coming in. I've been sort of the prompt writer, but as many sort of creative people as possible. I just think there's a lot of synergy and energy. We're developing a website which will serve as a kind of window out to the world, so that it's a way of actually bringing in other kinds of work like this, other kinds of applied theater, so that we're in a kind of conversation. But also the website ideally is a home for the participants and the UCSB and the faculty to stay in touch. And an ongoing theater company, I do have one student who's interested in actually going on a more yearly continuous basis with Los Creados Boys. Most importantly, of course, supporting these young men as they transition back to their communities is a challenge. And we realize that the recidivism rate in California is 70%. So we look to actually create connections, networks with serving institutions and educational institutions in our community, so that there is a handoff. This is only a 6-week program, and we know we can't actually cure or make any kind of claims of those transforming lives in 6 weeks. We hope we plant the seeds, and we're also hopeful that we're part of the solution. This is one of our guys, Angel, who actually graduated at Wright. We are also hoping to expand, and the reason we want to expand is not just so it's about an ego thing, but it's really about reaching lots of youth in our country. And I think this is, so far, has been successful in that they find that they do have a voice in society. And I think as a voice teacher, that's really important. So we would like to continue to build websites, social media, duplication in other venues, and instructional manual. This is our website. Just a snapshot of it. So next week I actually start a mini version of the Odyssey project at a correctional facility, which is a maximum security facility. Los Creados is a minimum. So with Los Creados, I'm actually able to bring the guys out of camp and they can perform in the theater downtown. Here we have to do the theater piece and visiting of the facility. Their rules are like what Emilio was talking about, a lot more stringent. Dress code, we have to check in with everything that we bring into that camp. So it's going to be interesting and challenging, and I'm very much looking forward. This is a manual. Again, my idea is to self-destruct. I'm into self-destruction as a teacher. I think that we should pass the baton on, bring other people in, so hopefully I'll get that. It's pretty much written, but published, of course, as an open. We're doing a film on the project, and the purpose of the film, I'm an actor, and so I understand how ephemeral acting is, and I believe that things should have a life beyond that moment. So I wanted to do a documentary because I thought it would give these voices a larger platform, a more national platform. So the documentary, I'll show a clip of it, actually deals with other issues that surround their lives, particularly youth of color, poverty, addiction, as well as the privatization of prisons and how that's also affected their lives. So I'm going to show about 12 minutes. Are you getting me volume?
There once was a kid who grew up with no rules or standards, with an outlook on life of what will I eat and do that is fun tomorrow. Like he was lost away from home, so he tried and tried his way back, but it seemed useless. So he went back to find his happiness on his own way, and was caught by a force much more powerful than himself. But he dug himself into a deep hole, which he constantly is trying to escape.
Time course of life, great energy, mystery. Time course of life, great energy, mystery.
My family wasn't really that close to me, my parents were usually always working. They never had time for me, I would wake up in the morning and then my parents weren't there. So I just wanted to find new friends and everything. And then that's how I ended up in the gang.
I got caught for residential burglary just to get some more dough. That's when my drug addiction took over my life.
If you would pop, don't you? This project is about finding your voice, not only in the theater, but ultimately in life, in such a way where they're empowered, in such a way where they actually can begin to understand that their voice counts. What we're doing is we're taking the Odyssey of Homer, building it from life stories which are current. The energy's low, your vocal energy's low, it's got to be much bigger. You're calling in your higher powers, actually bringing that energy into your being, into your body.
And for some people that can be what you believe in, right? Can be a mentor. Your higher power is individual because we don't just do movement to do movement, right? There's meaning behind it. At least while you work with me, I want there to be an intention.
Now, this is really risky. I'm going to ask you to do the next sort of risky thing, and that is to close your eyes. So when you close your eyes, you go into a whole different sort of planet, universe, world, your inner world.
They planted the seeds that we were bad, that we were a problem child, that we're hazardous.
I see that this isn't what you want. You just want, for me, I want to remember. I want to be known. I want to leave history behind me that is good, not bad.
I've learned a lot of things about myself. We all make society. Each person counts. Right now, I consider myself as a number. I've been a number.
How dare you!
How dare you!
How dare you!
How dare you!
You all have voices, right? This is good. This is good.
Growing up, when you never had enough, what was sad to being tough in the streets where I grew up.
I want to have a family, be with my wife, and just I want to have a good job, a good house, a car, I just want to be a good parent for my kids. Just want to be a good dad, give them my advice and everything, and make sure that they don't go through the same thing I went through. What you label someone really determines how you treat them. So if you label someone as a risk, you're going to end up treating them like a risk. How do you manage a risk? Let's contain it. Let's lock it up. So this cloud of criminalization follows some young people based on their race, based on where they're born, based on how they're dressed, based on how we've labeled them as a society. And over time, it just amplifies. So you have schools doing it, you have police doing it, you have businesses doing it. Before you know it, some kids do internalize this label, right? And begin to say, well, if I'm going to get treated like a criminal, I'm going to start acting like one. And that's where the problem begins.
I go to the store and I was like, oh, do you need help? They think I'm gonna steal something. Well, he's a criminal. He's Mexican. He's bald. He dresses like this. I'm kind of used to it, but I don't like it.
They don't have the confidence. They don't believe in themselves. They don't think they're worthy of success. Some of these kids believe that all they're worthy of is going to state prison. That's the life, that's what they know, that's their future. Going to college wasn't even a thought.
For the first time in the history of the state of California, we spend more on prisons than we do on higher education. We lock up more kids than we educate in college. So the problem is the criminalization of young people. They've already been tagged, provided a label that says you're a risk and a menace to society. I think we all would agree that prisons are reserved for violent offenders, for people that we can't control. learn, they listen, they understand, they love, they perform. And so it's important for us to find solutions that think outside of the box.
And it also helps for them to know that their own worth is of such value that they can't slip again. And that's an ongoing process. That's not something which happens, I understand that it won't happen in my one show, but it is something which can be started there.
I just wanted to touch base with you before we launch. This is your send-off. This has been a tremendous journey. This, for me, is what theater is about. Actually connecting with the voice in a way that makes a difference in the world. And I really hope that this project makes a difference for you in your lives. To Ithaca!
Divine forces of life, great energy, mystery. Divine forces of life, great energy, mystery.
I've never seen myself doing anything like this. It makes me feel like I'm so close, like away from people. Like I'm doing it for other people too.
I know I'm not a quitter, and I know that I can work things out even if I'm in a negative situation, so next time I'll know what to do. But I learned something.
It shows us boys that are in the boys camp that we can actually do something, and we're not just like these stereotypes that people, like some people will like just say we are.
They say don't judge a book by its cover, you know. I mean, you look at a book and the cover might be like, oh, it doesn't look good when you read the book, and it might be the best book you ever read.
They have to go back out into their communities and disassociate themselves from their associates, which is dangerous, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. It's difficult, there's no doubt about it. We always say the work starts when you leave, when you go through the gate, and that's the hardest part.
So recidivism is a major issue that's facing it. It's a big challenge, and it takes tremendous courage for them to hold on to their dream, to hold on to their vision of themselves, to hold on to their sense of themselves, to hold on to their voice as they move back into a community which may not share that vision completely.
If you violate the same things before you come out, 5 weeks, it's a violation. You're 18, you know what that means?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Getting a charge to a county.
Good boy,
Pretty much, yeah.
So what do you know about GPS? I can track everywhere you go. If you get home past 6 o'clock or 6 o'clock curfew, I will get noticed on my phone. I want to know the honest truth. And the biggest challenge you're going to have to A, get locked up, B, come back to camp. Those two things.
Why? All of them to be safe. You know, make good decisions. And God, keep his hands off him.
So, Donnell, again, you did terrific work, to be honest. And a lot of confidence. We want to give you this camera where you can go out and continue to document your honesty.
I'm always on this side of you. But your nose is going right to left, your nose is going left to right, right? The other thing is framing. When you shoot something like this is called a two-shot.
Mostly what we want to look at is your life as you return to shooting into society.
I'm empowering you now as a filmmaker. So now you're actually going to be writing a story as well as film.
So I just got home, and there's cops everywhere. I'm not sure what happened. There's like a lot of cops. Too many if you ask me. A lot of people are locked up, stabbings. It's just different, but fuck it, you know, it's life.
It's important to have a good budget because maybe I can be something in the future.
No matter what life puts me through, I'm not gonna give up, you know, like, just keep on moving forward. It's not look back, you know, never give up.
no matter how crazy the obstacles are that are put in your way, like as long as you keep moving forward and keep doing your best to go home to Ithaca, you'll get there one day.
Our next speaker is Nancy Rabinowitz. Nancy is a professor of comparative literature. She's an expert in Greek tragedy and 20th century fiction. She has written 2 books, Anxiety Veiled and Greek Tragedy, and has co-edited numerous volumes, including quite recently From Abortion to Pederasty, Teaching Difficult Topics in the Classroom. Nancy has been an active member of the Hamilton Oneida prison education project and has been teaching at the Marcy Correctional Facility, which is a medium security men's state facility. She has presented on her work teaching in prison, both at conferences and in print. And her inspiration, she says, is drawn from Rodisa Jones's Medea project. So, give it a
This was a tough act to follow, and I aim to just dive right in. So a lot of the stuff from my introduction is already covered. I got into this work because I was teaching a course at Hamilton Cole, Coming of Age in America, where I studied these statistics that you provided and showed my students, very privileged group at Hamilton College, that their lot was not the lot of many youth in America. And so I got engaged in thinking about the problem of mass incarceration and the racialization of mass incarceration, and went in to do what I could. I was just at a conference on activism at WCC in the UK, and there was a lot of emphasis on high school teaching. And I thought to myself, so it made me question why I did this. Why did this call to me? And I have to tell you, I think it's very self-serving in a way. I did not want to teach younger people. So I'm at a men's facility. But also, I think it was there. There was a person at the prison who was inviting people to come in and to do a class, a one-off class. And so, okay, you know, at this other conference, people asked, well, how do you start? You know, young people starting out. And I honestly said, you have to find other people, and you know, don't think you have to invent it. So, is it the best thing I could have done with my time? Who knows? But I'm in it, and I feel some guilt because I went in it to deal with racism and mass incarceration, and I'm really not, right? I am working indirectly on mass incarceration, but I'm working very directly on the lives of the men that I teach. So, as Dorota said, this is a medium security men's facility, and I was reading in preparation for this talk, which I've now cut out entirely, 2 books about the Barred Prison Initiative, which is very much a 4-credit. They graduate from there and they get a barred degree, and he's big into how important that is. So my guys at the Hamilton Oneida Prison Education, it's strictly ad hoc, right? We invite faculty, do you want to do this? And if they say yes, we say yes. And currently we have 4, economics, philosophy, Italian, and me. I'm in a lit department, and I've specialized in tragedy. But I did not really go into the prison thinking I would teach classics. And in fact, I was afraid to do so because of the distance, the elitism, all the stuff that makes us apprehensive. But working with Rhodessa Jones inspired me. So she's taken Greek myth and made theater with inmates at women's facility. And I thought, well, if she can do it, so can I. So we have all the obstacles that you've mentioned, plus being a volunteer group, we don't have much institutional support. Certainly, they give us money for books, but Hamilton does not support us in any particular way, and the prison throws in our way whatever obstacles they can. The books don't arrive, the students aren't there, whatever. The shifting population characteristic of medium security prison is part of the problem we face teaching there. Preparing for this talk, for instance, I didn't know who would be in the room, who would have gotten the books if they had time to read the books. The first night I had 2 guys there. The next time I had a different 2, and one had been out of the facility, so he didn't have the book. Nonetheless, on both occasions, we had great conversations. We have come off of a very difficult transition, and I have to say that unfortunately it's been resolved in a bad way. In the interim, we had a person who actually managed to get new guys enrolled in the class, which had never happened under the previous librarian who was in charge of our program, and now he's back, so we're crying. But anyway, the men in my group think the roadblocks are intentional, that the prison administration does not want them to think, does not want them to challenge their prison reality, and therefore they don't really want our voluntary book discussion group, since that is what it offers. On the other hand, that lack of organization and support has a silver lining. There is no reason for the men to come to the group except for the desire to be there. There is no degree, no character. I went into the problem, as I said, as a concern about mass incarceration, but you can't pick your students, and though the population of the prison is disproportionately black and Latin, our groups have become in the last several years disproportionately white, and there are many reasons for them. But among them is the attitude among the black men in jail that education of this kind is not for them. They have internalized the message, and they are now in the junior college degree granting program because they can see that there is some benefit in that. And so I think we have to address this problem. Initially, as I said, I was reluctant to teach tragedy, and outsiders challenged me as a class. Why not teach black writers instead, which was based on a false assumption, of course, on the racial makeup of the group. In fact, my group preferred Sophocles' Electra to Alfaro's Electricidad. Working with Rhodessa Jones, I assigned originally, years ago, Antigone and Fugard's Island, based on Antigone, and I intended to make a play. Not being a director, but being gutsy. And the play never came off because I broke a rule. The men had made me a Mother's Day card. I took it out with me and, like a jerk. I told the librarian who was running the program that I had done so, and that was it. But I didn't give up on tragedy. So in what follows, I will share with you what my students have had to say based on notes I've taken. The prison administration does not let me, because I'm not teaching for credit, take out any student writing, even though they want to work on their writing. So when time permits, I share my writing with the group before presenting it. And they're very invested in my writing and taking their voices public. And that sense that they have a voice is crucial, I think, to the humanities education that we're giving them, or that we're providing. When at one point I suggested we should not bother going forward, we were going to be part of the archive of performances of Greek and Roman drama on their website, and we were having so many administrative difficulties. I said, should we just forget it? We couldn't get any consistency, and they were really devastated that I would even suggest that. One man said that they were thrilled to be part of something beautiful and important beyond the walls of the prison. And one man involved in that project recently restated it in telling youngsters who were newbies coming into the group why they should stick it out and about the thrill it gave them. When I come in, I often ask how they're doing. The conversation may take quite a while, and I let it run. This is one place where the prisoners can talk freely, and this has to do with the humanism and the humanities. There's no guard in the room, and it is relatively quiet. Prison is always noisy, and the men in the group find many of the conversations outside annoying and stupid. The classroom may be a little bit overly stimulating, but it is a kind of noise that's intellectual. I often have to repeat one at a time to keep the conversation orderly. This is a kind of enthusiasm that is refreshing compared to my Hamilton classes where students object on their teaching evaluations to my insistence that they participate. The check-in is part of what I learned from Odessa Jones, and it is markedly different pedagogy from my Hamilton norm. It serves several purposes. The men get a chance to express themselves, and at the same time, I learn a lot about them and about life in prison. But, as I repeatedly say to them, I'm not there to get educated, and although I enjoy getting educated by them. And we do turn to the text under discussion. In my last class, they said they want more time on the text, but the truth is they are often unprepared for one reason or another, so we can't get into the detail that they and I might like. We do a lot of reading aloud, which has been very instructive, and it's out of necessity, right? Because you can read closely a small passage, and that compensates for some of the problems. We are literally on the same page, and it's been very useful to my pedagogy at Hamilton. I want to share with you what they've said to say about the plays we have read. These are not all from the same groups, but I'm not too interested in that for the purposes of this talk. I think they represent a very strong argument for the importance of the humanities. For instance, excuse me, I meant to bring this up. Okay. Interesting questions emerge from their perspective in our discussion of Agamemnon. You know, he's away for 10 years, they're all away for 10 years, or more. What will be waiting for you when you come home? What happens to children in the absence of the father? What happens to children when they witness violence between their parents? These all relate to themselves very directly. With more distance, they wonder if Agamemnon could have acted in any other way. Did he actually go to Troy because he wanted the wealth of Asia? Drug money? Is this embezzlement? Crucially, they are stunned that he would bring home his whore and ask his wife to take care of her. Similarly, they thought Jason was a jerk, their word, for underestimating Medea. For themselves, they asked, how do you remain a dad? What does it mean to be separate, to miss family events, including, some of the most important ones? Many of our conversations are centered on masculinity, making the connections to the men's own lives. Many say that women confuse them, wanting to be equal, but liking, sorry about this, to be grabbed by the hair. I tell them, I never said that. I said, equality. Anyway, I asked who was the father figure, the model for them. Is it the cool dude, the basketball player? Most of them say they grew up without men or models of healthy fathers in their lives. Several of them have many children with different women, not in touch with any of them. They talk extensively about the pressure to be a man, to be tough in prison, though the threat of rape, they say, is less pressing in reality than it is alleged to be, according to them. They explain who is a real man in prison is defined by what you see. It is superficial and external. In a recent conversation, they pointed out that every man in prison is projecting some image of themselves, that they don't just have to be the convict, although outside that may be how they will be seen and judged. Of course, then I wonder what image they are giving in our class. And they say that they feel that in this space they can say anything, that it is like a family. Of course, a lot of us can't say anything in a family, but never mind. There is pressure, they say, to get your weight up. But another man asserts that you don't have to be huge. It depends on character. There's another way to dominate a situation. Nobody says you don't have to dominate the situation. One of the men cultivates a calm attitude, he says. Waiting in line at the water fountain in the yard, for instance, when a macho man thinks he can just cut in, this individual lets him. He says, I can wait. There's another strong message that masculinity is control over yourself and others. Don't be sensitive, don't get involved. But other men disagree, saying, you don't have to follow that code. An older religious man is very proud of intervening to help somebody out. I wonder how much he gets away with because of his age, race, or years on the inside. In prison, fights do not typically cross race or age lines. The ancient warrior code of honor seems relevant to me for this group. In discussing the Ajax, I introduced the idea of Brian Dury's program where he discusses Ajax and Philoctetes with vets. They saw parallel more with other kinds of violence rather than war. For instance, one man agrees that in prison there's a code of masculinity that requires fighting, but he does not have to fight a kid who thinks he's tough. Honor is about saving your face with your peers. For some, the loss of an insight or a sense of self while in prison is a grave concern. What happens to the real you with all this pressure? Who is the autonomous, really? Will they take prison behaviors with them, like taking your silverware off the table in a restaurant out of habit? Tragedy inevitably raises issues of control. Certainly Odysseus is under the control of Athena as much as Ajax is in the opening scene. The men have sympathy for Odysseus when he's being worked on by Athena. In the program he says, quote, "It makes me see that we who live and breathe are nothing more than phantoms or insubstantial shadowings." The men in Marcy connect with the idea that the gods have power over Odysseus and Ajax. They express ambivalence about how much control they actually can have, how much choice is available to them. When we discuss the gender conflict in Agamemnon, they understand Odysseus' anger at the end as a response to his lack of power. Because, because incarcerated men lack power, lack control, and are therefore deprived of traditional measures of masculinity, they also attempt to gain it by putting others down. They need to assert themselves because they're not certain of themselves. Odysseus' domination by Clytemnestra comes through as a reaction in his relationship to the chorus. Personal experiences color reception. When we discussed Orestes and Libation bearers and Sophocles' Electra saying you must act, they saw it as about themselves, saying things like, now is the time, your life is in trouble, it's time to change, face the beast. They see that every moment is a choice. They blame characters who are not accountable, don't hold themselves accountable. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to sum up. We have had wonderful conversations about some of the big ideas. For instance, when we discussed the gnomic statement that wisdom comes through suffering in the Agamemnon chorus, the men assert they're learning a lot by being in prison. It is a necessary evil that can lead to growth. It shocked me. Reading the Apology, a different group said something similar. Prison gives them the opportunity to live an examined life. We discussed the differences between their lives and the lives of monks and other kinds of selves. And I bring up the daily humiliation they face, so how similar are they really to monks? This year, when a student said he was a Buddhist, we had another conversation about how you can construct a space for yourself while you're doing the time. It ranged from getting space at the end of a hall in your cubby to solitary confinement, which led one man to say he was in shoes, special housing, for 14 months. But he said it got him off all his meds, and it made him look deep into himself. I was shocked at this representation of punishment and self-discipline. In short, the incarcerated men I teach use the plays to think about themselves and their circumstances, and I encourage them in this. We discuss at various times the role of this class in helping them to avoid violence, revenge, anger. They think of it as giving them tools, a way of doing surgery on ourselves. I want to underline the point that others who teach in prison have also made. It's not the text so much that make the difference. I do this work as a classicist, but also as a human being. And I speak to the men as human beings. That's one of the main things about our encounters. The inmates are not numbers in either. Their opinions are taken seriously, and they are more than their crime. They feel, as I said, that this is a family, and they can say anything. The old-timers urge newcomers to come, but to show respect for the course. Don't take a book if you don't think you're coming back. So to come back to my doubts about doing this work versus the political work of fighting mass incarceration, some might say it's merely, putting garlands on the bars, but I would argue it creates a space between the prison and the discipline subject, and opening that space may have far-reaching consequences. Let me end with a quote from the early days of the program. The Greek tragedies really did provide me with an opportunity. This makes your heart sing as a classicist, to think very seriously about what makes me tick. Why do I make the decisions that I make? Where is the precedent for this or that? I feel that in the prison program, I can directly help people to live the examined life and participate with them in examining my own. As Rabinowitz says in one of the Bard Christian books, this is part of the liberal arts. As a liberal arts college, part of its mission is training students to engage in a thoughtful critique of their own lives and society. Through this, the institutions are both pushed and pulled to engage with their own historic and present-day roles in the reproduction of racial and other inequalities. So, if you ask me why tragedy, why the Greeks, I would say why not. It raises the tough ethical issues, gives all of us a lot to think about. It promotes criticism and self-criticism. This may be necessarily a program for the few, mind, a handful out of a population of 1,100. But for those in the room, it is very dear. We stay with the limits established by the authorities now that I've educated myself about them. We don't hug, and I don't yet have permission to take their papers home with me, but within those boundaries we are free to fly high, and we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Our last speaker is Jessica Wright. Jessica is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Southern California, but next year she will be the assistant professor in classics and medical humanities at the University of Texas in San Antonio. She works at the intersection of medicine and religion, and she's particularly interested in the history of perception of the body. She too received her PhD in classics at Princeton University in 2016, and while a graduate student, she taught 4 different college accredited classes at 3 different facilities. She also organized a tutorial group at 2 facilities. Her writing on the teaching in prison setting can be found in the open access journals Clolia and Adolf. So I'll give you Jessica.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to Susan and Dorota for inviting me and for organizing this incredible panel. So Emilio and I did not exchange notes, but you will note a rather beautiful piece of ring composition. I will only quote one of the same students that Emilio quoted. And I'm also going to highlight some of the same tensions that we've heard in the other papers here. I'm going to highlight them, I'm going to raise some questions, and then I'm going to bring you all in at the year and with some fragments from a poem. So I'm going to begin with some selections from some student work, and it goes like this. Dear Virgil, Virgil, you are a great writer. Disappointingly, I am not a good reader of your book. There are many lines within your book where I don't have a clue what you're talking about. But thankfully, my student partners were there to scream out ideas of what you might be referring to. Well, hopefully people keep reading your book. Good luck. Dear Virgil, if the Iliad was a poem, first let me say that it was different. If it was written like a poem that I would normally see, maybe I would have liked it better, if it wasn't so much a story. Dear Virgil, how is purgatory? Dear Virgil, are you proud of the Aeneid? I feel like there's a lot of ambivalence in your writings, especially toward Rome itself. Looking back, do you think that Rome and the Roman Empire was good for the world? Dear Virgil, I feel that your imagination is very interesting, even though you kind of stole the idea from the Iliad. Dear Virgil, sometimes I wonder if some of the characters in the book were replaced, like King Latinus. In the beginning was cool, friendly, and welcoming. He even offered Aeneas his daughter's hand in marriage. Then during the beginning of the war, he shut his doors. Then he talks about fighting. Then he wants to call a truce and stop the war with the Trojans. I don't know, whatever. It's your story. You can tell it how you want. So back to this purgatory thing. How do you like being stuck in purgatory to not being part of a religion that did not even exist? Not fair, right? I'll write again next month. Hopefully you can come to my graduation in the summer. So in fall 2014, I taught a literature class titled The Aeneid and Its Influences in a New Jersey state prison. It was the second of 5 classes that I taught for accredited through the Prison Teaching Initiative at Princeton University. The students received credit from Mercer Community College toward an associate's degree, which several of them did indeed complete the following summer, and they had a graduation ceremony. A good number of those students are now enrolled in a bachelor's program that is run out of Rutgers. It was a 12-week semester. We read a book of the Aeneid every week alongside a diverse array of texts that included both influences on the Aeneid, such as the Iliad, and texts that received it or appropriated it, such as the works of Derek Walcott, Phyllis Wheatley, and Gwendolyn Brooks. So I want to be clear about this. As a teaching team, we chose to read modern texts by a majority of non-white authors. As is, I think, not unusual in volunteer-run college-level prison education programs, we were all white and we were all women. Our students, unlike Nancy's student demographic, were primarily African-American and Hispanic. So selecting texts that exhibited to our students that the Aeneid is not just for white people was important to us, and we can talk more about kind of clumsy politics of this on our in the Q&A session if that's interesting to you. So the quotations that are shared in opening are from our students' final in-class writing assignment, a letter to Virgil. These passages capture some of the range and spirit of the class. The liveliness of conversation, the familiarity with which the students came to know and relate to Aeneas, their attention to historical and political context, their frustration with the strangeness of the epic and its form, and their creativity and humour in response. So classics and prison education, what does it mean to have an entire panel devoted to this topic? What is the problematic that is of interest here? I want to answer this question with a story, and I think this story echoes a lot of what has already been talked about. One summer, I was assigned to teach a college prep course at a youth correctional facility. I taught an entire syllabus that focused on race and education in 20th century America. My students were mostly black men in their late teens who were married with babies, and they'd been caught selling drugs in order to support their families. We read Danielle Allen, we read Wahida Clark, we read Ralph Ellison. It was a course called Thinking About Knowing. We talked about the Scopes monkey trial, we talked about evolution and racism. I thought the students would like the syllabus. I thought the students would love the syllabus. They hated it. They said to me, we talk all of the time about race. We are tired of talking about race. They complained every single week. And they were overjoyed when we got to the final text in the course. This was part of a unit called Imaginary Knowledges. And we read Roald Dahl's story, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. Does anyone here know The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar? So very briefly, this is the story of an extremely wealthy white British man who goes to colonial India and learns yogic skills. He is an intellectual genius. He uses his new skills to win at gambling in casinos all over the world, and he donates the proceeds to orphanages that he builds in developing countries. The students loved this story. They wanted to be Henry Sugar. They wanted to talk about what you could learn from fiction. Spoiler alert, the answer is not yogic capabilities. We debated the differences and the similarities between fiction and history and what you could learn from different kinds of texts. We had perhaps the best discussion of the entire semester. Sometimes I think that the story is a kind of metaphor for the complicated politics of teaching classics in a prison. Classics is a field historically and presently implicated in ideologies and practices of racism, misogyny, classism, colonialism. Like The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, the discipline of classics is a text that carries within it stories of colonialism and assumptions of privilege. Classics naturalizes individual and national claims to genius. Many practitioners of classics are aware of this, and many of them are uncomfortable with it. One response to this discomfort is to try to decolonize classics by breaking down the walls that guard the discipline and opening up side doors, windows, tunnels. This raises two questions that I cannot answer. One, is it possible to dismantle structures of oppression while maintaining one's privileged status within them? And two, to what extent do classicists who teach in prisons depend upon the labor of our incarcerated students to help us decolonize classics? Who or what is prison education for? Henry Sugar continues to enjoy his immensely wealthy lifestyle even as he distributes his casino winnings to his philanthropic foundations. He does not use his immense wealth to eradicate structural problems such as poverty. It is possible that, like many of us, he is hoping for a trickle-down effect that the children raised in his orphanages will have enhanced resources to tackle structural problems once they grow up. But for his philanthropic venture to make sense, he needs the orphans. Within the logic of the story, it makes a kind of sense that he does not stop the supply at its source. At the same time, the wonderful story of Henry Sugar does some good, not just within the context of the story where Sugar acts as a kind of Robin Hood, stealing gold from the wealthy and redistributing it to the poor, but also within the classroom. Our students grew through their discussion of this text. They crystallized new thoughts that had been forming through a long and difficult semester. They were energized by new realizations about the importance of fiction in opening up alternative perspectives, and about the need to read authoritative histories as always already a kind of fiction. A deeply problematic text became the basis for a conversation in which students developed a sophisticated critique of how we tell stories about the past and its relevance for the present. Stories are important. The stories we tell our students matter. The stories we tell about our students matter. And the stories we tell about ourselves and what we are doing with our students and why we are doing it also matter. So what stories do we as prison educators think we inhabit? These questions are far from unique to classics. Many prison educators seek to do anti-imperialist, anti-racist work within imperialist, racist institutions, and I'm talking about prisons. Their basic resources, though, are drawn from a historically imperialist and racist institution that is the academy. It's complicated work. Laurie Gruen, a professor of animal studies at Wesleyan University and also a long-time prison educator, talks about the vexations of prison education, problems that perhaps cannot be resolved, but equally cannot be ignored. But if this cognitive dissonance is not unique to classics, it is beautifully illustrated, highlighted, one might even say heightened, by the history of the field and some of its current reifications. Classics remains a guarantor of Euro-American cultural superiority. Much of what puts classics in the spotlight these days are debates about questions such as, were there people of color in antiquity, classical antiquity specifically? Were there statues of color in classical antiquity? To people in the room who are not classicists and who are not racist, these questions might seem laughable. But the whitewashing of classical antiquity is a deeply entrenched and stubborn illusion that continues to fuel contemporary racism. The idealization of classical antiquity as the font of all humanistic study and art history is not limited, however, to the art of Wright. When I first taught Latin in prison, I already knew most of my prospective students through a tutoring program that I was running, so I had the opportunity to talk with them about the course before it began. I took in our textbook, Wheelock's Latin, which is a standard in American college classrooms. The guys passed it around. One of them, a black man and a poet who spoke often and eloquently about race and incarceration, read aloud from the first page. He began, Latin, which I like to think of as the mother tongue. The mother tongue of what and of whom? So partly in response to the discussion provoked by this question, we introduced the politics of teaching Latin in prison into the prison itself. We didn't try to solve the problems on our own. We talked with our students about their reasons for studying Latin and what the reasons might be for not studying Latin. Our students read Barbara Goff's Introduction to the Body of Classics and Colonialism and wrote responses. One student wrote as follows: "This essay is depressing. It made me think, what else might be influencing me? Does the world shape more of me than I previously thought?" Though depressing, he wrote, Goff's arguments are enlightening, if also a little scary. After all, self-reflection is terrifying. And I want to note that this student was white, teaching classics as a self-critical discipline reflective on its imperialist and colonialist formation is not just about teaching students of color, quite the contrary. Studying Latin can be a way of deconstructing stereotypes and colonialist implications. It can also be an instrument of empowerment, as we've seen through all of these presentations. It is a site for creative appropriation. My goal in the classroom is always to make my material available to my students and then to let them decide what to do with it. Yes, I make them sit exams, and yes, they complain about it, but I also include freestyle projects that contribute significantly to the final grade. For the Latin class, we suggested that this project might be critical, linguistic, or creative. It was up to the student how much Latin they wanted to include and how they wanted to use it. They could write an essay entirely in English and get a good grade. Here are some examples of the projects that they came up with. Short stories written in Latin, several pages long. A translation into Latin of the 13th book of the Aeneid. And yes, you heard that right. There is now a 13th book of the Aeneid penned by one of our students. A translation into Latin of the Night Watchman's Oath from Game of Thrones. A translation into Latin of portions from Dante's Inferno. A translation into Latin of portions from the Christian Bible and lyrics by Fallout Boy. These were all first semester projects. The grammar was not perfect, it didn't really matter. You may have noticed a theme. Given total freedom, including the freedom to make the assignment really, really easy, our students opted for some of the most challenging projects we could possibly have asked of them. Traditional college Latin classes do not include this active use of the language to this level. They've been studying the language for 12 weeks, 2 hours twice a week. They had approximately 48 hours of class, but they had taken ownership over the language, and this for me was one of the most important outcomes of the course. At the end of the second semester, we had a wider range of projects. There was a student who translated a love poem into Latin. Several, having read Kate Tempest's rap poem, Brand New Ancients, wrote their own fictionalized autobiographies, incorporating Latin phrases of their own invention, and I'll quote a short portion from that at the end. There is another student who you've already heard about from Emilio, who translated a passage from Ovid, and I will reread his reflection on why he did this, but I have a slightly different version of the quote. Ovid is asterisk asterisk king, extremely hard to read and translate, so I have to go out with a bang. Latin gave our students opportunity to struggle. We had one student who straight through, he could not remember vocabulary, he could not remember Latin syntax week to week. This was not the result of neglect. He came to every study session, went over and over the material. He took pride in his obstinacy and dealt admirably with his feelings of embarrassment and frustration, and he had his reward of a kind. In the very last study session, when he was working with a tutor on his final project, which could have been an essay in English, he opted for Latin verse composition. If there are classicists in the room, you will probably know that Latin verse composition is like the scapegoat of classics. You don't do it. This student was ambitious and tenacious. Piece by piece, he worked through a love poem that he had found in an anthology of women poets and that he wanted to translate. And he achieved it. He raised his hands at the end of the session in a kind of eureka, and said that we've been keeping this giant secret that translating into Latin was actually really easy. He should have been doing it all along. Not all students had such moments of closure. Another, who was among the top 4 or 5 students in the college program, started out well but quickly fell behind due to very severe complications in his living situation. He likewise managed to scrape through, but during a progress review, he said to me that in Latin, he had finally found a subject he felt comfortable being incompetent at. This may be the most important lesson I have ever taught to a high-achieving student. So to conclude, dear Virgil, are you proud of the Aeneid? I feel like there is a lot of ambivalence in your writing, especially toward Rome itself. Looking back, do you think Rome and the Roman Empire was good for the world? Classics is intimately tied to empire. Studying classics, in prison or elsewhere, can be a liberatory and an anti-colonialist project, a way of seizing the master's tools and creating something new. But classics can also reinforce imperialist ideologies. It magnifies the tensions of the academy and of prison education in general. I have no answers to this problem. I only know that whatever answer there is must lie in the agency of our students and in our own willingness to live with cognitive dissonance. Teaching Latin in a prison taught me to let go of the idea that I knew what Latin was and what it should be used for. If there is any value in passing on the tools of my trade, it is, I believe, so that others can use it to achieve goals of their own making. Teaching Latin in a prison taught me that I could not possibly anticipate or control how they would do that. And I know we're at 10:45. Do I have time to do 3 stanzas from a poem?
We've got a little bit of time for discussion.
Okay, I will read the first 2 lines. The first 2 lines of this poem, which I love, are Ab initio, reincarnated I am the black lotus that grew from concrete. And this is a poem that is a response to the Aeneid by a tempest of Rabinowitz. There's more of it if you want to see it. Thank you all.
There have been many words of acknowledgement, and I want to add one more. The idea for this panel started actually with a conversation that I had with colleague Rabinowitz, who is a PhD candidate in English, and it was her question, why classics? Why is classics so often taught in prison settings? And I think we have had some wonderful answers in all 4 presentations, but I would like to ask this question again and hear the answers together.
Why don't they explain someone to the
Yes. In preparing for today, I reread an editorial in the New York Times from February 2016 about a project of Governor Andrew Cuomo to subsidize college education in prisons. And I was shocked and surprised how much opposition there was among the readers of the New York Times against the idea of teaching college level classes, but especially humanities in prison. And one of the most liked comment was by somebody who presented themselves as a retired specialist in the field of rehabilitation. And this person stated in oral authority that what the prisoners really need are vocational courses in carpentry or plumbing. So I wonder if you could give us some insights from coming from your students about the value of studying humanities as opposed to plumbing or carpentry.
Well, my men are very clear about it. They have very few programs, but they would make an administrator's day, know exactly what it does for them. It leads them to ask questions, think for themselves, and solve problems differently than they might have done before. And in one on incarnation of this talk, the attack on the humanities as useless, I think, has to be part of what we're talking about. So I don't think classics has cachet anymore, actually. So I don't think we have to worry about that part of it. But yes, it is a way to think critically. Certainly the language teaching is an important aspect too.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't actually think that it's an either-or situation. Why did they have vocational training and humanities courses? They actually fulfill two very different roles, and that should be offered and should be available, I think, for the students. And as it was, recounted in my paper, we had this good experience with one of the instructors of one of these vocational programs who made perfectly clear that he didn't really believe in helping the students. So I thought that at least our class, as challenging as it was, and for some of the students, it was a struggle, but provided a space in which they could share their feelings and feel valued, feel free to express their opinions, whereas I think in some of these vocational programs they do not have that option.
I'll just say one quick thing. Also, as an institution like the prison, I'm at very low funding for anything. So what they learn there in any of these vocational programs is already out of date. So the pretense of being useful.
To pick up on Emilio's point, that it doesn't have to be either or. Also, what you're saying, Nancy, we had one student who came and wrote poetry about his vocational trade. He was building gun cabinets for prisons. That was his training, to build cabinets for the officers to keep their guns in. And he was writing poetry about it. And I think that ability to think about and express what's happening.
I think it's very complex. You're not very often given the same opportunities. What happens, I think, in these kinds of settings is they open up, they get a kind of awareness, and they realize when they're working with other undergraduates on the same level, and they're all doing the same exercises, they're all writing, they're all drawing, they're all acting, and things sometimes are better, in some ways. But then, of course, the reality of the support system for them is drastically.
Yes.
So I think it's exceptional. But I think when they can make that shift, it's like remarkable. And probably because it sounds like I work with a younger population, I think there is more hope and more attention that time. And they do go, some of them do go to sleep. And they do think about things on the vocation. I think vocational and military are the go-tos only because that's what's been ingrained. And I know it's terrible, it is a job, it's better than it again. But, they still
Obviously, given the choice, students do prefer or do opt for courses in humanities and find it rewarding.
Well, they find it rewarding, but of course it will not get them a job. None of it will get them a job, though, is what I was saying, because the vocational stuff that they're getting at my prison is so woefully out of date, and not what you're saying. It's also complicit in the structure.
But I think the humanities opens up an awareness. So even if they are vocational courses or whatever, it's more that your imaginations have been tweaked and they can get some self-worth rather than some low self-esteem.
And the voice that you were talking about so powerfully.
Yeah, I think it does make a difference in that.
I mean,
do you think that the humanities courses that you teach give them better decision-making tools as humanities courses, or is it the therapeutic aspect of the classroom and being around intelligent people who care about? I mean, Michael, the stuff that you did in the documentary there is out, I'm sure these acts of caring resonate with them for decades. And with you guys, you're talking to them, you've got free space that they may not have at all in their lives. But is there anything that you see in the content about their own decision-making that's therapeutic? That's my question, rather than, or separable from the bubble and the time with people who are outsiders.
So it doesn't have to be either or again. That's our mantra, right? But I do think that with tragedy, it's a particular genre where there's tough decisions made. And they don't like to talk about the bad decisions they made. They got them there. None of the men in my group has ever said, we actually didn't do anything wrong. We were just shafted. They are shafted, but in a different way. So I would say that even though that they must reflect on decision making when they talk about what is the role of the gods, or whatever. So yes, I think that it is about decision making. It's about the fact that they really put down the characters who are not accountable. Show that tragedy is an excellent way of teaching that kind of conversation without it being instrumentalist. One of the things that the two big arguments for doing prison teaching is that, one, it's cheaper than imprisonment, and it is effective in recidivism, right? And what I really don't like those arguments. I would prefer to say it's liberatory and empowering, but definitely it does make people reflect on decision making. Sorry to be so long.
The numbers, definitely, sorry. The numbers, there are statistics for the Bard College.
Yeah, I know, but never mind. I'm not a statistician.
Neither am I, but not, nevertheless.
Right, it does work.
Research
They say.
shows that
And so one of the complications is what happens when you make that the argument for prison education. So if lower recidivism is the argument for prison education, and then recidivism rates go higher, do you stop your prison education? I think that's one of the points. But that's where it becomes complicated, I think.
Well, just quickly, I do think that it's the process of being in a position of thinking and leading and, of course, in acting that you are literally acting. So you're making choices, and I think that's a template. I mean, it's a stimulation.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, as I said, going to always be carried forth in the same generous way that they experience it in a context which is protected. Which actually is interesting because a prison benefit, that space we create is a safer space, and a very dangerous space. But I do think that in principle and in action, very therapeutic, even though I'm not a therapist, and also very informative in how to move it.
Thank you all for your presentations. I think that you did an excellent job of mapping a case for the humanities and classics in particular in opening up ways of imagining and living in the world in different ways. And I wanted to say that I have seen, I think, 2 performances of the Odyssey Project, and it is an incredibly powerful experience, I think, especially in the way that your artist activists speak to an audience that is comprised both of their families and of community members from all different places. And I think that that really makes us aware of our responsibility in a world that puts people behind bars. And I was wondering that, it's obvious the work that you do is really important and essential, but to what extent do you think that the institutions that you're working at are using your programs to justify continuing incarcerating people? Or are they, do they do that at all, or, kind of like what you were saying in your talk?
When you say institutions, you're talking about
Does the Boys Camp say we're a great place because we have this cool program, so it's a good place to put you?
Well, I think with the Boys Camp, it's a little bit different. I have to say there's sort of an exceptional organization within the megalithic, probation system, because they market themselves as a rehabilitation facility. So unlike where I'm going to go next week to Ventura, which is really a correctional facility, and I think that makes a big difference. So even though I think it's always been a dangerous relationship, and it continues to be. I mean, they like that they do it, but they don't make it easy.
Yeah.
So it's still an uphill struggle, and it's always every year I never know what's going to happen and who's going to be there. They pull people out, and I'm used to it now, but still, and they make it difficult for everybody who's coming in and all of the artists who work with me. So I think don't think they see it there. You know, I think as far as they're concerned, we can be there, we don't have to be there. I mean, I don't think we really know that kind of thing.
Thank you. I think the discussion will be ongoing throughout all day, and I'll go back to the question of the numbers.